Okay, so now that we have edited our audio file, our narration, to get rid of all the things that we don't want or we want to heal or we want to silence, what we need to do is we need to create a multi-track mixdown. Now this is going to be used for a video, so we're going to want to have the narration talking about Glenn Miller, but we also want to show a sample of Glenn Miller's music and then have it playing quietly in the background underneath the narration. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create a multi-track. We can no longer stay in waveform mode because that's allowing us to just edit one audio file. A multi-track is exactly what it sounds like. You have multiple tracks. So to do this, we'll click on the multi-track button, and it's going to ask us what is our session name. So we'll do Glenn Miller narration and make sure it's going to the project folder, which it is. And then you don't have to worry about template, but you can check out these if you want to. Now the sample rate, generally what you want to do is you want to have a sample rate that matches what audio files you're going to put into the multi-track session. However, the edited narration file is 48,000 hertz and the two music files are 44,000 hertz. So it's kind of never going to be right because either way I'm going to have to convert one or the other to match the sample rate of the multi-track session. So because 44,000 is good CD quality, we're just going to leave it at 44,000, and then we're going to leave it at 32-bit depth because that's the highest quality of depth, the highest range of audio samples that you can have, so to speak. So you never want to choose something like 16 because if you choose 16, you can never go higher. You can never add more bit depth. But if you choose 32 and for some reason you need to have it be 16, well, it's very easy to go back down to 16 because this is the highest quality. So that's a concept that you maybe learn in Photoshop or any kind of media program, that you always want to have the highest quality version of your project as possible because you can always make it smaller, but you can never make something small into something bigger because then it becomes pixelated or low quality or whatnot. So we'll go ahead and leave it at 32-bit depth. We know that our audio is in stereo because it has left and right channel. So we'll go ahead and click OK. And now we have a multi-track session. So we see a bunch of different tracks that we can add audio to. In addition, if you look over here in the files panel, we have a Glenn Miller narration.sesx. This is the actual multi-track session. And you can see by the icon that it doesn't have a waveform icon because the waveform icon just shows that it's one audio file. It has an icon for multi-track because you're going to put a lot of different audio files or waveforms in this multi-track session. So with that session selected, we're going to go ahead and grab this edited narration and we're going to pop it on there, and it's going to give us an error. It's going to say that the sample rate of this does not match the sample rate that you set for the multi-track. So do you want it to create a new one that will conform to match the sample rate? So that's pretty cool because it's going to kind of do that work for us. So remember, the sample rate of the one I just put on there is 48,000, but I said that this session is 44,000, so I need this to be converted to a 44,000 hertz file. So it's going to do that for me. I'll click OK. It's going to take a little bit of time to do it, and now you'll notice there's another file in my files panel that has a different name that says 44101, and this is basically just saying this is a new version of this file, but it's 44,000 hertz. So make sure you have that file and that they're all matching. So now all of these are matching. Now it's just a matter of me adding another track so I can hear Glenn Miller's music playing underneath the narration. So if I come up here, I have String of Pearls or Moonlight Serenade. Now these are two music files that were from a Glenn Miller CD created by the Morgan Community College Jazz Ensemble, and they're a great band, and if you want to buy the CD you can go to morgancc.edu. So we'll go ahead and add Moonlight Serenade, and you'll notice just from the amplitude, the visibility of the amplitude, that it's a lot louder than the narration itself. So we need to first turn down the volume before I play this for you, otherwise I'm going to kind of bust out your speakers or you're going to freak out if you have headphones on. So this little line here, it's a little yellow line on each track, that represents the volume. If you hover over it, it'll tell you it's a volume track. So if I grab this line, I'm going to pull it down, not all the way down, because if you pull it all the way down then you can't hear it, but somewhere down there, and we're going to listen and see what it sounds like.
Glenn Miller's influence on the history of jazz.
Okay, So here's a couple of things that I want to do with this track. First, I want it to play for a little bit, the audio, the music by itself, so that we can get a sample of Glenn Miller's sound. And then I want it to fade down the volume so that we can hear the narration. And I don't want the music in the background to really interfere with my understanding of the narration or compete with it. So I'm going to make sure that it's quiet enough that I can still tell that it's in the background and it adds great depth to this, but it doesn't interfere with my understanding of what's being said. And then toward the end, as soon as he stops talking, I want it to fade back in so I can hear another sample of the music for 4 or 5 seconds. Before I do that though, this audio track, the narration track, is only 36 seconds. But this Moonlight Serenade is actually 3 minutes and 16 seconds, so it's a lot longer. If we look at these sliders up here, you can see that there's a tiny green line up here and then a super long green line, and both of those represent the 2 different tracks. I don't want to have this song go all the way to the very end because that's going to take forever and there's no other narration happening. So what I can do is hover on the outside edge, the right edge of this music track, and you can see my mouse has changed to sort of a red angle bracket, and that's going to allow me to chop that down. So I'm just going to scroll and move it over, and I want that sound to end about there. Now it doesn't mean that I've deleted any of that, it just means that it's hidden, it stops there. So I can always pull it back out if I need more. But I'll go ahead and pull it to about there, and now you can see some pretty good stacking. So I'm at about 4 seconds in. I'm going to probably make this about 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4 out. So it's kind of staggered and it looks good there. Now the question is, how do we make it so that people aren't always having to turn up and turn down their volume controls? Now, they might turn it up or turn it down when they first start hearing the audio track, and that's perfectly fine because we don't know. Some people like stuff really loud and some people like stuff really quiet. So that's for them to decide. But once they set it in that first portion of your audio, we don't want to have to make them keep going up and down and trying to tweak it that way because that's so annoying. So how do we get it to level? How do we get it so that when it's playing the full music here, it's the same level of volume as when we're hearing the narration and the music behind it? Well, we're going to look at these levels down here, these kind of like moving columns or moving rows that show us when things get too loud. If I put it up here, and I don't want to do this, so you might turn this tutorial video down, but if I put it up here and I play it, it's going to turn yellow and red because it's way too loud. See? Sorry, that was way too loud. So we never want to have that happen. If we play it again, after moving it down, see how all those are kind of sitting around 30? Let's listen to it again. So in general, we're staying around the 30 mark. Let's go ahead and mute this track so that we can hear what the narration track is sitting around.
Glenn Miller's influence on the history of jazz represents a contradiction. Though many jazz...
Okay, so that narration is around -18. So basically what we want to do is we want this first portion of this audio to be around -18 as well so that they're equal. So let's go ahead and unmute this and pull this up and play it.
Glenn Miller's influence.
Okay, so it gets up to -18 at certain points. It's still a lot more robust sound, so I think it can be even a little quieter, but I think that'll be okay. Now the problem is when we actually get the problem is when we actually get to the narration, he's too quiet. We still can't hear him with the full sound happening in the background. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually lower this a little bit. So let's see this one more time.
Glenn Miller's influence.
Okay, so we want to pull this volume down at a certain point. So if I just click and drag, it's going to allow me to change the audio level for this entire track. Now, if I click once, as you can see on my mouse, there's a little plus sign next to the mouse. That means I can add control points, and that's going to allow me to move the volume down at different places. So think of these as audio keyframes or control points. And actually this yellow line in Audition workflow is called an envelope. So we want to kind of fold and bend this envelope the way we want it to go. I personally like to call it rubber banding. That's what we use in video editing. So this looks like a rubber band. And if you remember those elementary school things where you kind of stretch the rubber bands around pegs, that's what this reminds me of. So anyway, a lot of people call this rubber banding as well. And what you're going to do is you're going to adjust it so that you can pull this control point down so that it's much quieter, or it fades to a quiet level when the narration comes in. So let's listen to this again.
Glenn Miller's influence on the history of jazz represents a...
Okay, so I think that level's good. I can make it a little bit quieter, and I can probably pull this one down a little bit more.
Glenn Miller's influence on the...
So see how it faded out? It went from this level of volume to this quieter level, and now we can hear that narration.
The history of jazz represents a contradiction. Though many jazz enthusiasts disapprove of his discipline...
So now what we need to do is, once we get to the end of the narration, we want to also add audio keyframes or control points or pegs, or again, whatever you want to call them, so that once he stops talking, it's going to gradually fade back into a stronger volume level.
Entertaining his listeners.
Okay, so I think I'll add one here and pull it up. Now, if you do really dramatic steep spike, it's going to really increase in volume very quickly.
But to entertaining his listeners.
See, and that just doesn't sound right. So if you create a more gradual slope, it's going to be a lot more subtle.
Critics, but to entertaining his listeners.
And that's probably too loud.
Critics, but to entertaining his listeners.
Okay, so that's the basics of creating a multi-track mixdown. There's a lot of different buttons that you can kind of research and see what they do. Usually I'm messing with the mute and the solo when I want to solo a track, and then I'm usually working with these different volume lines. This pan line is going to allow you to move from left to right channel. Like if you have the sound of a car moving from left to right, you want it to be strong in the left ear, strong in both, and then strong in the right ear. So you get that kind of depth, making it seem like it's actually passing by. So you can do this pan level if you want to and kind of experiment with that. But this is a basic multi-track mix down, and then making sure you're paying attention to levels so people aren't turning it up at this point and then all of a sudden they get here and they realize they need to turn it down or they need to turn it up, and that gets really annoying. So making sure that the loudest point here is also the same decibel level as the loudest point here will ensure that people aren't always having to mess with those controls. Once you're done with the multi-track, you can save the session, but remember, people with Adobe Audition can open your session, but people who don't have Adobe Audition, who just want to hear the music, they can't because they don't have the software. So we need to export this as an audio format that most people can hear. So if we go to File, Export, we're going to go to Multi-Track Mixdown and choose the entire session. If we wanted a certain clip, we could highlight a specific chunk of it. So if I wanted to just do this tiny little chunk, I could do that. But for right now, we just want to do File, Export, Multi-Track, Entire Session. And then this is where it's gonna change the file name. You can change it to whatever you want. You can tell it to save wherever you want it to save to. And then you can choose if you want to say a WAV file, an MP3. Remember that a WAV file is uncompressed, so it's going to be a really large file. But again, you're not going to lose any audio quality. While MP3 is a compression method, so you will lose some data, but it's actually stuff that you probably won't even notice is gone. Our human ears can't hear it. So this will give us a smaller file size. This might end up being 20 megabytes, while this MP3 audio might be less than 1 megabyte. So it's really good for downloading to an iPod device or putting up on iTunes or sending to a friend via email, whatever you want to do. So we'll do MP3 audio, and then it's saying it's at 44,000 hertz and all this other options. So go ahead and hit OK, and it's going to create that multi-track mixdown. And then go to the folder where it was saving to, and you should see that MP3. And then that audio file can be seen by anybody who has a software program or whatnot that plays MP3s, which is pretty much anything.